Again, we're thankful. I mentioned this last week that Reverend Cindy Caldwell has joined our staff, our preaching team here at the North Carroll Cooperative Parish. And this week she reminded us of this show as we were discussing this week's message in the context of this performance review memos from HR. She reminded us of the show Undercover Boss. And so we're going to look at this very difficult and exciting passage from Scripture from the book of Judges, through the lens of that show, Undercover Boss, and see if we can learn something about our faith through the actions of the characters in this story. I am Reverend John Rudolph from the North Carroll Cooperative Parish, and I'm thankful that you have joined us at NCCP Anywhere for the weekend of March the 3rd, 2024. The episode that comes to mind to me, because Pastor Melissa and I used to watch this show regularly as well, not so much anymore, but I do remember one that really made an impact on me, and they made a couple stops that day, but the first part of that episode was the CEO of 7-Eleven, whose name happens to be Joe DePinto. And he was going to visit a couple 7-Elevens, and the first one was in Shirley, New York. And so he gets all done up and disguised, and he goes to work at this 7-Eleven. One of the things that was interesting to him about that location, out of all the 7-Elevens, was the volume of coffee that they sold on a weekday morning. In the morning rush, they sold 2,500 cups of coffee. So he was for sure he thought that it was because of the placement of the coffee dispensers, or it was the display of cups, or something that management had done at that store in order to make the volume go up. But as he learns and as he fumbles some cups and as he makes a few mistakes and growing pains over his first few hours at that store, he learns that it's something much more simple than that, yet profound. It's a human being, and her name is Dolores. The reason that 7-Eleven sold so many cups of coffee was that Dolores was so personable. And she knew every customer by name, and she knew their stories. And she served from a place and a heart of hospitality, and that is why that 7-Eleven thrived. So just an ordinary worker there at 7-Eleven had nothing to do with, the district manager or the manager of that store or any of the corporate policies or even some great plan that the employees had come up with together. It was simply a person who knew how to get the job done in Dolores. And of course, as that show always goes on, I'll just mention as we get ready to look at the passage, he also discovers from her customers that she's actually very sick and in need of a kidney transplant. And he goes on to end that part of the episode by finding ways to help out Dolores as well. So you can Google that, or you can watch it on your favorite streaming services and find that episode of Joe DePinto, the CEO of 7-Eleven. If we bring that approach to this scripture, again, as we mentioned in the first week of this series, we can anticipate another tough passage. We started off with Abraham having to climb the mountain in anticipation of sacrificing his own son Isaac. And then last week, the three youths that stood tall in their faith and were willing to go to the fiery furnace in order to not bow down to anyone but Yahweh, to God. Well, this week is no different. This is in the time of the judges. So this is the pre-monarch period in the life of Israel. Judges was God's answer to the monarchy. And so judges not only, like we think of today, they certainly did oversee and help settle disputes, but more importantly, they were the final rule of the land, and they helped hold the communities together. They were the leader, and they also served as prophets, and so they spoke on behalf of God to the people, and they spoke to God on behalf of the people as well. So it went both ways. This story happens to include one of the most famous judges, and that is Deborah, who we have mentioned before in a previous series. She's remarkable. She's world famous. She used to hang out under a tree and dispense wisdom, and she's really terrific. And she's the same here in this story as well. So Deborah is really not the issue here, but she here is part of the story, and so we'll look and see where she goes with this as well. But we're going to jump into this story, and again, kind of like we want to see how did this is a battle scene, because the Israelites, again, this is verse 1, that's not part of our reading today, but this is the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after King Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan. And so the Canaanites are ruling over the Israelites because the Israelites had failed to do what they were supposed to do once again. And again, this is really a pattern throughout the whole Old Testament where the Israelites will be fine, they'll be doing right, they'll be following God, they're living in peace, and then they do what is evil in the sight of the Lord again, and they fall over and over again. So this is one of those periods of a fall. And so they're in captivity, and something has to be done about it. So that's where our reading picks up today, and I'll read probably most of it. It is, however, in your Grow Guide there on the page, you can reference the reading from Judges chapter 4, beginning with verse 12 and finishing out that chapter. But we'll start with verse 12. When Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the troops who were with him. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand." So we're going to stop there for just a second and figure out exactly what it is that's going on. And so first of all, we're right into the middle of the story. So we need to back up between doing evil in the sight of the Lord and how we got to the day of the battle. And that is Deborah the prophet had gone to Barak. Barak is the general, let's just say, of the army, of God's army, of Israel's army. And so Deborah has received a word from God and goes to Barak and says, "We are going to be delivered. You are to go and lead the army, and we're going to defeat King Jabin's army." And what Barak does at that moment, the big general, who you expect to be the hero of this story, he balks. And he simply says to Deborah, "I'm not doing it." And he takes a step back and he says, "Well, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to lead the army unless you go with me." So here he is. And again, we think about today's time period, but this is thousands and thousands of years ago. This is ancient times. And he's looking at a woman, a female, Deborah, and tells her, "I'm not going into this battle without you." And so that's shocking and surprising. Even though Deborah's a judge, even though she's a prophet, even though she's the one that's heard from God, it's still shocking and surprising. And so Barak says this to her, balks. Deborah turns to her and says, "Fine, I'll go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." And so she forecasts and foretells that, okay, let's do it. We'll go together, but you're not going to get the credit as the general of the army. A woman's going to get the credit. If we just stopped there and didn't go any further, we'd kind of miss some surprising turns in this story, even if we assume they won the battle. So we must go on, and that's where we picked up in verse 12, and you kind of heard these names, and you're like, where did these names come from? So we had to get that and catch up, and that's why we did that. So back to the story now. So then, even on the day of battle, we see this guy, Barak. So then Deborah said to Barak, get up. So like he's sleeping. He's not even ready. And so who is this guy, Barak? And so like, again, if we're using that undercover boss motif and you think that this general is going to be the one that's leading everything, he's in charge, you're sorely disappointed already because A, he seems to be a coward, doesn't want to go into battle by himself, and B, he's lazy. He's laying around when the army's ready to be defeated. But Deborah wakes him up. Get up and get ready to go. And so we have a problem here. Another funny thing around the table this week in light of talking about corporate life is they said, how in the world did Barak ever become the leader of the army, the general? And then everybody said he must have known somebody. And so he must have been promoted because of his relation, not because of his performance. But nevertheless, this is who we have. And so he gets up, and so Barak went down to Mount Tabor with 10,000 warriors following him. So he has a vast army, 10,000 warriors. And the Lord threw Sisera, so the enemy, and all his chariots and all his army into a panic before Barak. Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot, while Barak pursued the chariots and the army. All the army of Sisera fell by the sword, not one was left. So we'll just stop there for a second. So basically the battle per se is over. The opposing army, the enemy, has been defeated. God caused them to panic and get all jumbled up, and Barak's army defeated them, except for Sisera, who was their general. He has got up. I mean, he's a great guy too, right? He fled, left his army to defend themselves. And so now we have this chase that is on. Sisera has fled away on foot, and now we get a new character, the character of the day. He's fled on foot to the tent of Jael, Jael, wife of Heber, the Kenite. And so here we are into a tent. And we have a new person, Jael, and a new group of people, the Kenites. And the Kenites are, at minimum, pretty friendly with the Israelites. And so the Kenites aren't the enemy. And there is some genealogy here where we have some relation to father-in-law of Moses and that sort of thing. So it's a familiar name, albeit not everyday common in our scriptures so far. But it is a place where we can pause for a second and recognize that group of people. But we don't know who Jael is. All we know is that she is a young woman, and that Sisera, the enemy, has come to her tent to be hidden, to be fed, to rest, whatever the case. For there was peace between the enemy's army, King Jabin, and of Hazar, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. So Jael's family and the enemy's army, king, there were some friendly relations, so that's why he ran to her tent. Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear." So she's kind of buttering him up, in other words. "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So a basic need that needs to be met. Give me some water. So naturally, what does she do next? She goes and she gets a skin of milk. She gives him some warm milk. So you remember that old wise tale from your grandmother's house when you're getting ready for bed, she'd give you some warm milk to put you to sleep? Well, it works here as well. He doesn't protest. He drinks down the warm milk and he goes and falls off to sleep. So then she stands by the entrance of the tent, and she was told, if anybody comes and asks you, "Is there anyone here?" say no. So that's the plan. He's fast asleep. She's supposed to be standing guard. But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg. And we're not talking about the little, aluminum pegs that we use for our pop-up tents, but, a gigantic steel peg. She takes one of those pegs as he is sleeping, she gently walks over to where he is. He's covered because he's hidden. And she drove the peg into his temple. The Bible's not PG, by the way. There's plenty of violence in these scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, but in the New as well. This is one of those cases. Drives the peg into the temple of Caesarea and kills him. Just then, Barak came in pursuit of Caesarea. Jael went out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there was Sisera lying dead with the tent peg in his temple. So on that day God subdued King Jabin of Canaan before the Israelites. Then the hand of the Israelites bore harder and harder on King Jabin and Canaan until they destroyed King Jabin of Canaan. And so the battle's over. And so again, if we just kind of dropped into this story, we want to discover how this battle was won and by whom. We know who it wasn't won by. It wasn't won by the general, the big powerful man who was leading the army of 10,000 and their chariots. It was won by an ordinary, gentle human being, a woman who we know nothing of before nor after, and her name is Jael. She finished off the enemy's general, and she completes the task, albeit in a very graphic way. She makes sure that the job was completed. It's amazing as we're spending time here in this season of Lent, and we're kind of using the spirit of John Wesley and his class meetings where they would meet once a week to kind of do a performance review. Where are we with our faith? How is it with my soul? Is the Bible living in me today? Is one of the questions that they would ask. Do I give it, the Bible, time to speak to me on a daily basis? Is the Spirit of God in me? And we're asking that of ourselves. We should be all year round, but especially during this season of Lent when we are acknowledging our distance from God and trying to close that gap. A performance review of our faith on a daily basis. We look at this story and we see that we don't have to be some extraordinary prophet like Deborah. We don't have to be the general of God's army to save the day. This is just an ordinary, unexpected, unassuming, small character. This is the Dolores of 7-Eleven. It's not the district manager or the owner of that franchise of the 7-Eleven that comes up with the why and the how to sell $2,500 or 2,500 cups of coffee a day. This is Dolores, who just knows simply to allow people to learn who she is and vice versa, and that sells coffee. We don't have to do extraordinary things to make extraordinary impacts. God, all throughout the scriptures, in this extraordinary story of battle and graphicness in terms of the way it ends, but constantly, as extraordinary as the stories go, and as fantastic and miraculous as God acts, it's ordinary people like Jael that save the day. It's ordinary people like you and I that can live out their faith in extraordinary ways because it's God, like in this story, that's going out in front of us. All we have to do is get up and go, as Deborah emphatically gets Barak to do. Get up and go and live out your faith today, and more importantly, like Wesley says, allow the Bible to live in you. And when we allow the Bible to live in us, then we can do extraordinary things in faith as well. Certainly not getting confused and not making light of this. We're not looking for acts of violence like Jael did, but this was a war. It was battle. It was war. It had to be done. but extraordinary acts of faith, of love of neighbor, and love of God from ordinary people like you and I. That's the example that this story of Deborah, Barak, and Jael give us. It's very inspirational in terms of thinking about, does our faith fail to meet expectations? Does our faith meet expectations, or does our faith exceed? And so honestly ask yourself that question today. Where do you fall in those three categories? And wherever it may be, may you continue to grow in your faith today, tomorrow, and the next. And may God be with us as we do. Amen.